This is a social construct as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely right.
Right, so it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £20. What is this? What is money?
Yeah, so that line is interesting. I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum. For the longest time, money was something tangible. It's gold and silver. For thousands of years, that was the case. However, something significant changed at the end of the Second World War. Through circumstances, the US ended up with all of the gold. And that's partly because it was the functional economy that was exporting and earning it, but also it's because a lot of countries used it to safe haven their gold. And the Americans, they decided, but they didn't particularly want to give it all back again.
So this was, sorry to interrupt you straight away because I'm thick, was that, after the Second World War, this is the end of the gold standard, is that correct? Is that what it was or not?
Not quite,
no.
But it was the beginning of the end of the gold standard.
Okay.
Because what they said is, okay, we're going to have a new system where dollars are interchangeable for gold. So you don't need to worry that all the gold is safe havened here. Now, actually, that does kind of make sense because you can pull cons with gold. You can drill into the bar and you can put stuff into it. So it makes sense to have it all in a single location where it's verified, and then you just move it around between different vaults for nations, and therefore you use the dollars instead. Mm. So there was a sense to the system, and it worked quite well for several decades until about 1971. Then what happened is people started to become concerned that the US was spending more than they had any right to. And people became nervous about having their gold stored there. And this triggered a crisis. And the way that President Nixon responded to that crisis was to say that he was going to break the link between dollars and gold. So now, dollars were literally just pieces of paper. But it was okay because everybody had faith in the system. There were some upsets while that system bedded down, but from that point on, paper, money came into existence. Now that sort of unlocked a couple of new abilities for money. The most significant was that governments can now deficit finance.
What does that mean?
It means that they can raise revenues of that much, and they can spend at that much, and they can make up the difference with debt.
Got you.
Now that's brilliant for politicians, because of course they can make all sorts of promises, vote for me and I'll spend this on you, while not actually having the money to do that.
Is that a little bit like the magic money tree?
Yeah.
So,
it's more like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah. Which the magic money tree seems to be, to me.
Now, absolutely, the politicians, they quite like that system, obviously.
Yeah.
And you might think the next guy wouldn't like that system because he's being handed the debt of the previous chap. But actually he doesn't mind it either because he can just roll over that debt and add his own debt on top of it. And it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And that's been the case since 1971. So as you can imagine, you roll that forward several decades and that debt really starts to accumulate.
30 trillion or something, isn't it, in America at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's two different ways you can measure it. You can measure the absolute debt, but then you can also add in the unfunded liabilities.
Right.
So what I mean by that is they have promised, say, Medicare to people years and years out, and there's other promises they've made to people. If you look at the promises that they've made, divided by the number of people, you're looking at something like 500,000 debt per individual.
In America?
Yeah, in America. So if you go to US Debt Clock or something like that, you get a whole load of stats. Go to the bottom right-hand corner.
So 350 million people in America all owe, if every deal was to be settled tomorrow and every debt was to be paid, every single 350 million people in America would need to pay 500 grand.
Yes.
That's worrying, isn't it? That's just a slightly concerning situation to be.
That would bring it level, but of course there's still deficit financing. So that
who do they owe the money to? They're just printing more money, essentially. Is that right?
Well, that's the whole thing. Who do they owe the money to? Now, in the past, it would have been individuals would have bought that debt. Then it was other nations would have bought that debt. The US found an ingenious system to make anybody who wanted to buy energy in the world buy their debt. Although we could be starting to enter a phase where the US Treasury have to buy their own debt, and that's
which, as far as I understand, they are doing, aren't they? But does that mean because obviously in England we're getting a massive inflation coming, which is the robber in the house. Is the inflation a result of fear in the system? of that the system might collapse?
Well, no, it's because the amount of money has increased.
Because we printed all the money during lockdowns and stuff. What did England?
I mean,
do?
that's part
a
of
day?
it. But the other part of it is I said that they unlocked a couple of new abilities. One was deficit finance. The other one was they effectively
What's
made
deficit finance?
Well, it's that where they can spend that much and they can raise revenues at a lower level and make up the difference.
Yeah.
The other ability they unlocked was essentially to make money debt. Now, a really simplistic explanation of that is if I gave you £100, you wouldn't care whether I'd saved up that money or if I had borrowed it. From your point of view, it spends exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's a sort of overly simplistic way. Another way of looking at it is to say, if you go to your bank to take out a loan, what they don't do is wait until 400 Mrs. Miggins are paid in their savings and then take that money and give it to you.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. If you go and take a debt, they basically just create that money as a liability. They give
For
it to you.
themselves.
Yep.
Right.
So private banks can create money.
Right. Okay.
So therefore, money is debt in our system. So there's the sort of original level of core money and there's a total amount of debt. What that means is that it is mathematically impossible to pay off all the debt that exists in the world.
Right.
And it's worse than that. It's not really practically possible to pay the interest on all this debt without creating more debt.
Of course.
So you get into this situation where debt just grows and grows and grows. You get to that situation like we talked about where everyone in the US, and including retired people and babies, owe 500,000. You also get into the situation, well, I think world debt is something like 400% of GDP.
World debt is?
World debt, 400% of GDP.
So, I mean, it really is a social construct then. It's like, it doesn't mean anything, almost.